First of all, thank you for the invitation, and aapko mubarak ho on a very successful summit. Unfortunately, I could not be here. As you know, I just arrived back from Beijing this morning, but it's great to be here. Dekhiye, I didn't compare notes with Dr. Moeed, but I would start with some of the macro points that he has raised, and then as a banker, I would be doing injustice to the industry if I don't make a few points, especially around some of the points that were made by the last panel. देखिए ये जो Dr. Moeed ने भी कहा, I'm sure all the thought leaders have already mentioned, there's no dearth of policy prescription in Pakistan. We know the what and the why part of it. Whether it was the World Bank study which was quoted, कि 2047 में वो बात ये नहीं कर रहे थे कि $300 billion से $2 trillion, they said 3 trillion हो सकती है, provided you do a few things. And then we've been signing various SLAs with the fund program over the last 3 years. We don't even have to go right into the yesteryears. So we know exactly what we are signing up for. Tax to GDP, exports, SOEs, the issue around the energy, जो सारी हम बात कर चुके हैं. हमारी problem वहीं आती है आके जो ख़त्म होती है is the how and the implementation and the execution part of it. And that's where the how part which we need to figure out, and also the who part. ये प्रोफेसर किशोर महबूबानी हैं, उन्होंने सिंगापुर के बारे में ये बात कही कि how did Singapore became from a third world country to a first world country, and he said we followed MPH, meritocracy, pragmatism, honesty, and quite frankly that's governance 101, sheer competence or basic competence, right team at the right place, छोटी से छोटी कंपनी हो, बड़े से बड़ा मुल्क हो, timely decisions, timely execution. That's what is required to get the implementation going, and therefore leadership matters. So, अब अगर हम इसको जो अभी बात हो रही थी 9-month SBA की, quite frankly, this has been a watershed moment. I think we got some respite कि हमें ये 9 महीने का मौका मिला ताकि caretaker से we get and move on to an elected government. So that we don't have to get into a huge issue during this transition, and a lot of credit to the current caretaker setup that we have gone through the review in a good way with respect to the fund program and the next tranche. But the reality is that we will have to get into another program. I'm assuming other thought leaders and other leaders here have already talked about it. And जब मेरी पिछले हफ्ते बात हो रही थी with the fund mission, and they said we are in the 23rd program, why do you think the 24th program is going to be a success? And I think it's a good question to be asked by the fund. And my response was, because our hand has been forced. The government's hand has been forced. If you first look at the external front, the dole-outs are gone. कि deposit दे दें, deposit को roll over कर दें. It was a finance minister of a friendly country out of GCC who in Davos in January of this year, I'm not sure he was talking about Pakistan, but he was certainly talking about the countries that benefit out of those programs. They said, you help yourself and we'll help you. And therefore, all these friendly countries are now talking about equity investments and board seats. And that's where SIFC is a very pragmatic response to that investor interest as we go forward. The second thing is the domestic front. देखिए ये डॉक्टर शमशाद अभी बात कर रही थी, and I think she has pushed back, quite frankly, her cabinet colleagues in terms of saying there's nothing to give. There are no supplementary grants, right? Because that's where we are. And from that perspective, the fiscal space which is being created, uske do aspects hai. One is you can continue to tax, and that's what Dr. Moeed, I think, probably was referring to. You can continue to come back to the same for more. Salaried class, banks भी हमें उसमें आज चूँकि मैं आज सुबह वापस I've just arrived back here in Karachi, another 40% tax. That's fine. But ये quarter तो गुजर जाएगा. And then what? What will you do in the next review? Unless you actually bring in the retail and the real estate and the agri sector. ये हमारी बातें हैं कि जी ये फेडरेशन पे क्या होगा, प्रोविंशियल क्या होगा, ये हमारा प्रॉब्लम है ना. So we have to look, and मैं इसमें डॉक्टर आतिम मियां का मैं बहुत मदाह हूँ, मेरी उनसे कभी मुलाकात नहीं हुई, लेकिन उन्होंने कहा कि हमें not only ecosystem, he said we have to look at the entire nervous system, because we hide behind these things, that this is federation, this is this is provincial matter, etc. No, I mean you have to increase the tax net. इसी तरह जो expenditure side की बात है, the reality is this PSDP has to go away. Has to go away. जो अभी बात हो रही थी public private partnership, that's the way to go going forward. So इसमें अब जो कुछ और speakers ने ये बात की है कि जो charter of economy की बात है, and whether all the political parties can come together before the election, after the election, charter of economy हमें सिर्फ इसलिए चाहिए ताकि policy continuity रह सके. That's it. That's it. We don't need to get anything from the government or from Islamabad. That's it. Because Islamabad, quite frankly, has nothing to give. ये जो हम बात करते हैं कि जी ये हम इस्लामाबाद जाते हैं और डॉक्टर मोईद ने भी उसका जिक्र किया कि कौन बाहर बैठा रहता है, कौन अंदर बैठा रहता है. हम इंडिया की बात करते हैं, जब बजट का वक्त आता है, इंडिया में, तो मुंबई दिल्ली नहीं जाता, दिल्ली मुंबई आता है. Because the private sector ने मांगना बंद किया. Private sector ने मांगना बंद किया. They created their respect, and therefore the federation comes to engage with the private sector. And that's what we need to create here. And I'm very, very sure it's the private sector which has to lead Pakistan out of the issues and the situation that we are now. लेकिन उसमें हमें प्राइवेट सेक्टर में जो पहले भी बात हो चुकी है, we have to talk about charter of business. And charter of business is कि we have to fundamentally look at our business models. और मैं अभी 1 मिनट में बैंकों पे भी आऊँगा, क्योंकि ये बात सही नहीं है कि बाकी सेक्टर्स के बारे में आप बात कर लें और बैंकों के बारे में चूँकि अभी बात की भी जा चुकी है, तो मैं आना चाहता हूँ वापस बैंक से ऊपर. तो उसमें हमें फंडामेंटली अपने बिजनेस मॉडल्स को रिव्यू करना है. And these import-led, subsidy-supported businesses are not going to be sustainable in Pakistan as we go forward. It's as simple as that. देखिए we can put our heads under the sand and say कि नहीं कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है, अगला program आएगा, and then we will go through it. And then there are people who are actually doing what they need to do. We talked to one of our clients, and they got a joint venture with a Chinese company in terms of manufacturing SUVs here in Pakistan. ये जनवरी में उनसे बात हुई कि भाई कितनी SUVs यहाँ लाएंगे, फिर CKDs का प्रॉब्लम है, इंपोर्ट का मामला है, तो why don't you consider, और ये right hand है, तो why don't you consider export markets? And the first set of SUVs from this company a month back have gone to Kenya because they actually looked at the African market, and they have gone the export way. So I think this can be done. The private sector and the businesses, if they actually think about these business models rather than saying कि नहीं ये जो status quo की बात की गई है डॉक्टर मोईद ने, ये status quo अब नहीं चल सकता. And therefore some of this will have to change. देखिए जहाँ तक बैंकों का ताल्लुक है, from our perspective and certainly from HBL's perspective, HBL के सिलसिले में तो हम ये कहते हैं कि we are more than a bank, because we are looking at 3 things. 35 institutions हैं where you can get financing. अभी बात भी हुई कहीं कि कहाँ capital enhancement हो सकती है, कहाँ credit enhancement हो सकती है. But financing is still available. जहाँ तक demand का ताल्लुक है, भाई 24-25% पे demand नहीं है. People are deleveraging. The private sector is deleveraging. unless because at 20-25% this is equity. You might as well put your equity rather than getting especially in the corporate and commercial segment to get financing at that rate. तो जहाँ तक सप्लाई का ताल्लुक है, वहाँ डिमांड का ताल्लुक है, जहाँ गवर्नमेंट बोरिंग का ताल्लुक है, और ये मुझे अभी तक याद है, मेरी इसाक डार साहब से इस साल के शुरू में बात हुई, उन्होंने कहा कि आपके रेट्स इतने चले गए हैं. मैंने कहा जी प्लीज़ पुट योर हाउस इन ऑर्डर. If your revenues and expenditures meet, you don't need to go to the banks to borrow. And if you don't have to go in this quantum to go borrow, banks will behave. So इसलिए ये कहना कि जी वो ऊपर हो गया, policy rate regime ये हो गई फलान, look at the root cause. Why don't you look at the root cause, which is the fiscal discipline, which has to come in the government? And then you can talk about, the crowding out or not crowding out. But in any case, देखिए हमारे लिहाज से financial inclusion, I think that is absolutely critical. And I'm very happy to say from HBL's perspective, हमें 70 साल लगे 2018 तक to get to a client base of 12 million. Alhamdulillah, we closed at 36 million at the end of September, and this is all about digital. Because देखें digital की यहाँ बात हुई होगी आपके सारे. Digital is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. It's cheaper, faster, better. And that's what the banks need to think through, and I do think the industry is actually already moving in that direction. We welcome the new digital licenses which have been provided by the State Bank. Come one, come all. इसमें तो जितने लोग आएं और जितनी financial inclusion हो सके, तो अगर 36 million है, we want to go to 60 million, we would still be banking 1/4 of the country's population. There's still much more to do around what we have to do. Agriculture की बात हुई है, उसमें obviously यहाँ reverse gear लगा है. उसमें हमने again from HBL perspective we are very fortunate कि State Bank of Pakistan और SECP ने हमें license दिया है कि हमने 2 हफ्ते पहले we have created a fully owned 100% owned subsidiary called HBL Zarai Services Limited. इसमें हम सब non financial जो services हैं, agronomy है, mechanized service है, उसमें हम वहाँ से provide करेंगे, especially focused on small farmers. ज़फ़र खान साहब यहाँ बैठे हैं. I'm very privileged that he is accepted to be a board member on that. तो देखिए again on the agriculture side जितने भी banks इसमें आ चुके. SME की बात हो रही है. देखें हमारा बैंकों का मसला रहा है. हमारा बैंकों का मसला रहा है और वो बात दुरुस्त कह रहे हैं जो भी कह रहे हैं कि whenever we talk about lending, especially in the SME space, we take collateral. कि अपना घर गिरवी रख दो, अपनी गाड़ी गिरवी रख दो, कुछ गिरवी रख दो. लेकिन a lot of banks have now started moving towards cash flow lending ताकि हम supply chains को समझें. मुश्किल काम है, किसी का घर गिरवी रखवाना तो बहुत आसान काम है, लेकिन वो cash flow को समझना, उस cash flow के लिहाज से उसकी lending करना. So I think a lot of banks are already moving in that direction. Exports की बात हुई है. On the textile side, I think we are going to be range bound, and we are going to be range bound because of the dependence on energy. And energy is not a short-term issue. लेकिन जो भी हमने especially hosiery side पे, मैं textiles की ज़रूर बात करूँगा. I was at a factory in Faisalabad a week back, और वहाँ हम value add में बिल्कुल गए हैं. लेकिन it will remain range bound. जहाँ तक mining और agriculture की बात है, under the SIFC umbrella, इंशाल्लाह 4 से 5 साल में huge upside, but it has a gestation period. जो अगर उमर सैफ साहब आपकी ये कॉन्फ्रेंस में आए थे तो उन्होंने बात की होगी कि जो टेक्नोलॉजी है और उसमें जो अपसाइड है in the next year and a half is huge, and therefore we have collaborated with Pasha to make Pakistan a tech destination on that side. बैंकों का जहाँ तक ताल्लुक है उसमें again the companies that we can revitalize. देखिए the companies can go up and down. कंट्री के साइकिल्स आते हैं, सेक्टोरल साइकिल्स आते हैं और इश्यूज आते हैं, बट वी हैव टू स्टे विद आवर क्लाइंट्स थ्रू द साइकिल. पिछले हफ्ते हमने चिनाब की रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग के में हम मौजूद थे, एंड आई थिंक दैट्स फैंटास्टिक. 5,500 जॉब्स हैव बीन नाउ रिस्टोर्ड बिकॉज वन कंपनी हैज़ बीन रिस्ट्रक्चर्ड. जब हम बात करते हैं एम्प्लॉयमेंट की इस मुल्क में, तो अगर बैंक्स स्टेप अप, इफ बैंक स्टेप अप and we are stepping up, that's where you can create that impact. मैं 2 आखिरी बातें कहूँगा क्योंकि 31 सेकंड रह गए हैं, and I want to stay within the time period. The reason I was in China was we signed a strategic agreement with Bank of China yesterday in Beijing, और उसका मकसद ये है कि जो phase 2 आ रहा है CPEC का, inshallah with this caretaker government and the new elected government, उसमें is about monetization of the infrastructure which was created in CPEC phase 1. It's about agriculture, it's about technology, it's about special economic zones, and we want to learn from Bank of China. It's the second largest bank in China and the fourth largest bank in the world, and we are hugely privileged that they chose HBL as a partner. उसका मकसद ये है कि जो CPEC phase 2 है, उसमें we actually play our due role as we go forward. And the last thing is sustainability. देखिए मुझे हमारे clients भी बहुत मेरे से नाराज़ हैं और हमारी investment banking team भी हमारे से बहुत नाराज़ है कि we said no new coal, but we have set our goal to be net zero by 2030, and I think we all have to play our role in terms of this sustainability and the climate financing agenda, and we have to walk the talk. सिर्फ principle sign करने से बात नहीं बनेगी. All of us, including the banks, have to move in that direction as we go forward. Asfar, once again, I'm very grateful to you for the partnership जो आपने हमें offer की, all the thought leaders who are here, the delegates who have traveled from outside the country. It's a huge thing for us that you have traveled to Pakistan to actually see the situation on ground here in the country, because the reality is we are all very clear that the country is inshallah going to go places, and it's the private sector which is going to lead this country out of this, and therefore your presence here helps the private sector to keep that faith and have your support as we go forward. Thank you.